So once you have installed the correct software and you have opened it up, this is what it will look like. So what we have over here are viewports. So I'll go on explaining what viewports are. So you can see it's written top, perspective, front and right. So that is basically your top view, or your perspective view, or your 3D view, your front view and your right view for whatever model you are creating. So you can go inside and outside a viewport by double clicking on the name. So let's try going inside our perspective viewport. So we double click on the perspective, and that's how you go inside a viewport. So once you are inside the perspective viewport, let's see how to pan and zoom in Rhino 6. So for panning, you hold on to your right mouse button and you move it around. That's how you pan. And for zooming in and zooming out, we use the mouse wheel. So that is panning and zooming for you in Rhino 6. We can do the same thing in the other viewports also. So let's try going out of this viewport now. You double click on the perspective once again to go out of the viewport. So to go inside a viewport, you double click on it, and to go outside a viewport, you double click on it again. So that's inside and this is outside. So now let's pan and zoom in all the other viewports and see what happens. So let's pan in the top viewport. So to pan, you use your right mouse button, you hold it, and that's how you pan it. Zoom in and zoom out, you use your mouse wheel. You can do the same in the front and in a right viewport. That is panning and zooming for you and the explanation of the viewports. You can change the size and the position of the viewports by selecting the edges like this. You just hover over your mouse icon to the edges, and you can increase and decrease the size of your viewports. So what if I want to increase the size of my perspective viewport? I do it like this. You can also select or just hover your mouse over to the center of the intersection point of any viewport, and you can change your viewport size like this. That's how the viewport sizes work. And now let's take a look at the grid system. If you work in Rhino, you will understand that the grid is used to evaluate where you are in your 2D space. You will also use grids like this as a construction planes to draw geometry and orient yourself. So let's take a look at how you can custom preview them in a way that you can work with them. So for going to the grid options, you can go to tools over here, and once you click on tools, you can find options on the last tab or on the last button. You can just click on options and you can wait for this to pop up, and you can find grid under document properties. So you have document properties and you have grid in the third option. So if you click on grid, you'll see a number of options over here. So let's take a look at all of them and understand how you can manipulate the custom preview of the grids that you have on all the viewports to establish a better looking grid. So after clicking on grid, you can see you have three options over here. You have apply grid changes to, you have grid properties, you have grid snap. So let's take a look at all the options that we have under grid properties. You have grid line in the beginning which says 70. So let's understand what this 70 is. I'll click on OK. I'll double click on my top viewport to understand what that 70 is. So 70 is essentially the number of boxes that you have in your X and Y direction. So I have 70 of these small boxes, this small grid box that you can see over here. I have 70 of these boxes in the X direction and in the minus X direction and Y direction and minus Y direction. So I have 70 of these boxes. Alright. So if I go to tools, if I click on options once again, and if I change 70 to 7, if I click OK, you can see now that I have 7 boxes on Y and 7 boxes on the X. And similarly, I have 7 on minus X and 7 on minus Y. So they are the number of boxes. So once again, let me go back to options, the grid options, and let's turn them back to 70. Now you have minor grid line which says 1 mm because our units is in millimeters right now. It says 1 mm. So minor grid line is basically, if I turn it to 2, you can see the entire thing just got scaled up. If I turn it to 3, you see as I keep on increasing it, the thing keeps on getting scaled up. Now if I hit OK, what this essentially means is that this one particular box that you can see, it's 3 mm by 3 mm now. Initially it was 1 mm by 1 mm. So now each box is 3 mm by 3 mm. If I go back to my options, if I turn it back to 0.5, click on OK. Now as you can see, it has scaled down. So now each box is 0.5 mm by 0.5 mm. Let me just go back to options, turn it back to 1 mm. Now let's understand major lines every. So this particular option says 5. So let's take a look at what major lines mean. Over here, if I zoom out, you can see that there are some darker grid lines and there are the lighter grid lines inside those darker grid lines. So these darker grid lines are essentially the major grid lines, and the grid lines inside the darker ones are your minor grid lines, which are a little bit light in color. If I go back to options, if I change it to 10, if I hit on OK, so now you can see you have the major grid lines every 10 boxes. So you have 10 boxes in the X direction and 10 boxes in the Y direction. After every 10 boxes you have a major grid line, which is the same for the entire grid. What happens if I change this 50? Hit on OK. Now you can see I have my major grid line every 50 boxes. Let me turn it back to 10. Now as you can see, you have these three options over here. You have show grid lines, you have show grid axis, and show world axis icon. So let's understand what these three options do. You can click on OK and you can move out of your top viewport. You can go back into your perspective viewport. So let's understand what these three options do for viewports. Alright. If you turn off show grid lines, you can see the grids are gone. Turn it back on, they come back on. So this is basically a toggle for showing and turning off your grids. You have show grid axis on the next option. If you turn that off, you see the X and the Y axis, the green and the red lines that you had, they are missing. If you turn them back on, they come back on. That is a toggle for your X and Y axis. Then you have show world axis icon. If you turn that off, you see this particular small icon that you had on the bottom left corner, that goes missing. If I turn it back on, it comes back on. This is essentially a toggle for this particular icon. In the next option we have grid snap, and it says snap spacing 1.0 millimeters. This is basically it has something to do with the grid snap option. So let's take a look at it. Just click OK and you can see grid snap option on the bottom. You have grid snap, ortho, planar. So you can just click on grid snap. Once it's on, we can try it out using this point icon that you have, the left panel that you have. You can just click on that. You see, if you zoom in, you can really see that point is snapping to the grid intersections. This is basically the grid snap. You can come out of it by hitting escape, and if you go back options, you can see the snap spacing was initially 1 mm. So every box is 1 mm by 1 mm. So our point object was snapping to every 1 mm intersection of the grid. So if I change it to 0.5, if if I click on OK, now my grid snap will work at a 0.5 mm distance also. As you can see, it is snapping in the middle of every box that I have. You can come out of it by hitting escape, go back to tools and options. That is basically all the grid options that you have. So once you have understood all this, and once you have changed all the grid properties and grid snap according to your preference, you can then see the first option that we had, apply grid changes to. You can apply all these changes that you have just made to all the viewports or only the active viewport. That was a basic overview of the grid settings in Rhino 6. Now let's take a look at how you can change the units. So you have units over here under document properties, which is the second last option. You can just click on units, and you see you have units and tolerances, you have custom units, and you have distance display. So you can change the units from under model units, which is under units and tolerances. You can click on this tab and you see you have a lot of options pop up. So you can select the units that you need for the preference of your modeling, and then you have the tolerances of those units, which you can select based on the kind of work that you are doing. You have distance display on the third option, which says decimal and fractional. So basically, if you have a drawing and if you are drawing dimension lines, you can choose to view those distances in a decimal format or in a fractional format. And on the third option, you have display precision, which says 1.000 as the default setting. You can change that. This is essentially a setting for the number of decimal units that you would prefer to have in your dimensions. Now that you have understood how to change the unit settings, let's take a look at our appearance settings. So you have appearance under Rhino options, which is the fourth option that you have. You can click on appearance and you see a lot of options pop up, but you can see a small arrow on the side of appearance. You can click on that, and under appearance you can see colors. If you click on colors, you have the viewport colors over here and the object display colors over here. So you can change these. So if you want your viewport background to be white, you can just select on the background color over here and you can just change it to white. Click OK. As a result, now you can see your viewport background has turned white. So that was a basic overview of the interface and navigation settings in Rhino 6, just enough to get you started with the basic and intermediate modeling techniques.